If you've ever found yourself daydreaming about donning armor and charging into battle, or maybe even ruling a kingdom, you probably already know that life in the Middle Ages wasn't all that glamorous. But one of its most memorable symbols lives on in modern times, thanks to spooky season. In case you hadn't noticed, we're talking about those bird masks worn by doctors, which have become synonymous with creepy, crawly things that go bump in the night. The scary beaks are still used today to decorate everything from Halloween costumes to Christmas trees. And it seems like everyone knows they were used during the plague. But why? Why did doctors wear those masks? And what did they think they were doing? Well, the first thing you need to understand is just how scary the 14th century was if you happened to be a doctor, because it was kind of terrifying. The bubonic plague killed nearly half of Europe's population over the course of 3 years, and there was zero understanding of what caused it. All people knew were that it seemed to come out of nowhere and kill people fast. Plus, it brought with it a bunch of weird symptoms that had never been seen before. It wasn't long before people started trying to figure out the source of this mysterious illness. And their theories centered around something called miasma, which means bad air. Miasma theory was popular in ancient Greece, Rome, and Egypt, and basically said that diseases could be spread by poisonous night air that came from swamps, sewers, or even corpses. This made sense to people at the time because they didn't know about germs or viruses. So when someone got sick, they assumed it was because they'd breathed in some toxic fumes. The idea stuck around for centuries and was widely accepted until the mid-19th century, and it made sense. After all, there are plenty of situations where breathing in bad air will make you sick. Think about the air you breathe when you walk through a crowded city street or ride the subway. It can be pretty gross. In fact, research has shown that New York City subway cars can have up to 22 million bacteria per cubic meter of air. That's enough to make you sick if your immune system isn't up to par. So while the idea that swamps and sewers produce dangerous fumes might sound crazy now, back then it was a reasonable theory based on experience. But since doctors were desperate to find out what was causing the plague, they took the idea of bad air and ran with it. Because of this, they came up with some pretty extreme ways to avoid breathing in deadly toxins. And the most iconic of these methods was the bird mask. To understand how beaked masks worked, you need to understand what doctors thought the plague was. For them, the illness was all about bad air, so they wanted to find a way to block it out. Wearing a mask was one option, but regular cloth wouldn't do the trick. So instead, they soaked their masks in water and covered them in fragrant herbs and spices. Since these smells were so strong, they thought they could block out any potentially dangerous fumes. Today, we know that soaking your mask in water probably wasn't the best plan. However, we also know that strong smells can actually help keep you safe. Masking harmful odors has been used for centuries to protect against indoor air pollution, volatile organic compounds, germs, and more. In fact, the US military has even experimented with giving soldiers chewing gum that tastes like camphor or peppermint to help them detect chemical weapons. According to one soldier who tested the gum, you chew it, suck it in your mouth, and immediately you can detect chlorine, soman, and sarin. Of course, by immediately, he meant within 5 minutes. But that's still pretty good considering that sarin gas can kill in just 10 minutes. So while soaking their masks in water might not have helped doctors identify or avoid the plague, covering them in fragrant spices certainly may have helped them notice when they were walking through a cloud of poisonous gas. And that's why doctors wore those silly-looking masks. They were trying their best to stay safe during a horrifying pandemic. Unfortunately, this protective gear ended up becoming the creepy symbol of early medicine. And we can probably thank 2 famous paintings for that. One is called Dr. Plague and Death by Peter Bruegel the Elder. It depicts a haggard doctor wearing one of those big, scary, beaked masks. The other is Dr. Strandman by Spanish painter Francisco Goya. Both of these pieces show doctors wearing masks that are sealed tight to their faces with no room for error. And that may be part of the reason why these outfits were so memorable. Unlike today's medical professionals, medieval doctors weren't able to see patients' faces. Instead, they were forced to peer out at the world from behind deadpan visors. No wonder we remember them so well. Of course, the use of bird masks eventually fell out of fashion after the plague, mainly because they didn't actually work. But that doesn't mean they disappeared completely. During the smallpox epidemic in the late 1700s, British physician Thomas Sydenham suggested that covering your face in vinegar and spices could protect you from infection. So once again, doctors turn to the beak. This time they designed it so that they could breathe through their mouths without touching their chins. The idea was that doing so would prevent droplets from infecting them, which makes sense. After all, the droplets that spread COVID-19 are expelled from infected people when they exhale. These droplets float in the air and can enter another person's body through their eyes, nose, or mouth. So avoiding being too close to someone with the illness is still a good idea. But Sydenham masks didn't really catch on. By that point, people understood that the best way to avoid catching smallpox was to get vaccinated. And that was much easier than slapping on a vinegar-soaked bird mask. Still, the accessory continued to appear in art throughout the 1800s. One famous example is The Doctor, by American painter John Singer. Sargent shows a doctor wearing a white mask with a huge black beak and tinted lenses. Despite the terrifying appearance, the painting was actually inspired by the Red Cross nurses, who served during the Spanish-American War. According to Sargent, the goggles were used to protect the nurses' eyes from infection, and that seems to have been true. Throughout the early 1900s, doctors and nurses continued to wear various masks to stop the spread of illness. Today, we know that most of these efforts were futile. In fact, back in the early 1900s, people believed that tuberculosis could be spread by fresh air. So many worried that their homemade masks would actually do more harm than good. That's why they began creating special rooms with ultraviolet lights to disinfect incoming air. The idea was that the sun's rays could destroy bacteria and make the air safe to breathe. But this only worked for certain types of bacteria, and tuberculosis wasn't one of them. Despite this, the practice continued and eventually became part of hospitals' standard operating procedures. These days, those special rooms are used to disinfect equipment instead of incoming air, because by now, we know that clean air is uncreated with UV light. It's created with HEPA filters. And we also know that masks aren't always helpful in stopping the spread of airborne illnesses. However, they are sometimes essential. And thanks to recent innovations, they're a lot less clunky. In 2018, the CDC began recommending that everyone wear a mask while traveling by public transportation. And that advice has stuck around. Today, millions of people in Asia wear masks to keep themselves and others safe on public transit. They're also used by medical professionals and anyone who works with hazardous materials. And they come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. There are even special masks that can protect you from smoke and ash, which is great news for firefighters. So while we may never have perfected the art of blocking bad air with our clothes, we have come a long way in figuring out how to keep ourselves and others safe. And that's definitely worth celebrating. Thanks for watching this episode.